Check 1, 2, check 1, 2.
Why is it always check 1, 2 and never check 1, 2, 3?
I don't know. People always say 1, 2. It's like tradition. Or superstition, maybe?
Check 5, 6. Check 5, 6.
Yeah, see, that sounds weird.
Well, what if we go higher? Check 10, 11. Check 10, 11.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
But bigger numbers give you like more of a check, right? Like check 36, 37, check 36, 37.
That's just too long. I hate that. Let's just do check 1, 2.
Check 846, 847, check 846, 847.
You're just being silly now, James.
Check 9,462, 9,463, check 9,463, check 9,463. Could you two please step away from the microphone?
I fixed it.
No, I did! And Walt and James were very quickly arrested at the supermarket where they found an unattended speaker system. I genuinely feel like if we found, like, we're going to Command Fest this weekend at the time of recording.
It'll already happened when you guys hear this, but that's fine.
But if there's a PA system, that is probably an accurate representation of what happens if they let us on a microphone.
I believe it. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's a GCP by the GCC and POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. We're all uniting forces to help you to have better games of Commander. I'm your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. I'm your other host, James. Now, before we get to this transmission, just wanted to remind you, all of you lovely listeners, because I know that some of you are listening to this at like 5 a.m. when this episode releases on a Friday morning. You have some dedicated listeners.
They might be overseas, so it might be like a reasonable hour for them.
That's true, but
it's possible.
I wake up in the morning and check how many downloads have happened, and by 7, there's already a bunch of downloads from you guys.
Wherever you are in the world, we appreciate it.
We appreciate you getting so into it so quickly, and if you want to support the amazing content that you're hanging out for every single week, there's no better way to do it than directly at our Patreon, so you can head to patreon.com/getcommandedpodcast to support what Walt and I are doing and help us out when we get abducted by the Space Commanders every now and then. Which, speaking of, we've got a transmission for this week.
We do have a transmission. The green light is blinking. So from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders, it's time to get commanded.
All Commander players need to attain a dominating position in order to win the game, but some players reach this position at too early a stage. You are more likely to win by becoming the second threat.
Interesting. So basically they're saying hold back the person that's... I mean, the Command Zone have talked about this before, interestingly. I remember they did an episode where they said, if you're the first threat, you're the one everyone wants to remove. So the Space Commanders are saying here, don't be the first player removed, be the second one, and then you're likely to win the game?
Yeah, I definitely have heard Command Zone talk about this. Yeah, definitely explicitly they've said, like, it's better to be the second threat. So maybe that's where they get the words second threat from.
Yeah.
The other... place, I suppose we've talked about this before, or the context we've talked about this in, is talking about Sam Black.
Blessed be his name.
Holy man. Who we talked at length about the way that he builds decks, because he's got these great Twitter threads, great YouTube videos about the way that he builds Commander decks.
Specifically his mana curve.
Well, specifically mana curve, and basically his philosophy behind his mana curve, which, by the way, if you don't know, there's the mana curvey episode, but basically he builds really low mana value average decks. So lots of 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana spells, as opposed to that 4-5, where some of us are playing more spells. And specifically, the reason that he said he does that is because he likes to play incidental value that doesn't draw attention to himself. So I'm guessing this is where the Space Commanders are coming from, is when you're that first threat, right? First out the gate, you're probably going to draw all the attention, and then the second threat, the one who comes after you, is more likely to win that game because people have sort of used their resources on that first player. I'm guessing that's where they're coming from.
Well, like, I think a really good example of this in the thread of, Sam Black's Twitter rant was he used an example of like nested shambler. It's a 1-drop and it's played really early in the game. If you have that in your opening hand, you play swamp, tap it, play nested shambler. Nested shambler is a 1/1 that says when it dies you make X 1/1 squirrels where X is its power.
Yeah.
That is not a thing to be like, oh my god, we got to remove that thing on turn 1. No one gives a hell about that. No. That is not part of his deck building philosophy. But I think we should outline what an early threat in Commander does look like.
Well, the words that the Space Commanders used was dominating position. So they said, like, we all want to get to a dominating position, but you shouldn't do it too early. So I guess we should outline what a dominating position actually looks like in a game of Commander.
Yeah, this way you can also identify it when you're playing games of Commander.
Oh,
I think if you're able to, go, okay, I remember listening to the Get Commander podcast, and your board state looks exactly like the first 10 minutes of the episode that I listened to. This is a really good way of like highlighting who is the threat at the table.
I like this. It's like a sort of sub-command within the command. Very
How
good.
to identify the threat.
Yeah, basically. So we're talking about the threat, basically. The first threat who's in that, quote, dominating position. So I think the most obvious indicators that someone's in a dominating position are going to be things that are immediately obvious to all players in the game. So I'm talking specifically usually about the things you can see on the battlefield and other information that you're aware of, like, well, as a good first example, someone's life total. Right?
Yes, I mean, that's like, if you think about a scoreboard, which Commander doesn't have, the closest thing it does have is the life total in the middle of the table.
Yeah.
That's the closest thing we have to a scoreboard, but life doesn't always indicate who's ahead.
No.
But it is a really good indicator. If someone's on like 100 life, it is very hard to kill them. Unless you're going down an infect route or commander damage route, then your deck might be more equipped to deal with them. But generally, 100 life is really hard to deal with.
Well, and you would be right in going, we need to do something about this.
Yes.
Like pooling resources, everybody else. I guess the other things that are immediately obvious besides life total is, that stuff you can see on the board. So, for example, if one player has more mana than everybody else, that's like a pretty good indicator that they might be ahead. Like, if it's turn sort of 4 or 5, and I have like 8 mana and you have like 5 mana.
So I've just hit a land drop on every turn, but you've played 2, 3
maybe
ramp
2, 3
spells.
ramp spells.
Yeah.
Like, I just have so many more options for what I can do.
And you can do more things on your turn.
Yeah.
I think this is like the perfect time to shout out turn 1 Sol Ring. The immediate threat in all Commander games. If someone plays turn 1 Sol Ring, on turn 2, they have 4 mana if they hit their land drop, which... If you play a turn 1 Sol Ring and miss your land drop, you should be A, okay, but B, punished just a little bit for keeping that greedy 1 land turn 1 Sol Ring hand. You should understand that that's not always a slam keep.
No, I think, turn 1 Sol Ring is maybe the most quintessential I am the threat thing, and I'm the first threat as well.
Yes.
That's very much saying, like, hey, I'm in the lead right now.
Especially before anyone's done anything. And even if they follow it up with, like, Arcane Signet, then it was like, well, okay, turn 5, you've got 5 mana if you hit your land drop. You might not have many cards in hand, but you can cast your commander. You can maybe play an enchantment that has an activated ability where you draw cards. Like, you would just, like, kill that person.
Yeah.
If someone goes Sol Ring Arcane Signet, that is T1 threat.
They deserve to be the threat.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. I think another thing that you might notice about a very dominating board is just like the sheer number of creatures. Not saying like if someone's got like 100 creatures, but let's say I'm playing, I don't know, some sort of aristocrats deck or something.
Sure.
And I've got a couple of creatures on my board, but you're playing like a big green stompy deck and you've got like 10? Just by virtue of the fact that maybe me and the other players are on 2, 3 creatures and you've got 10, you do just have more ability to influence people's life totals, most likely.
I think you can also look a little bit deeper into creatures here as well. I think the amount of creatures is an easy thing to identify immediately because you can just see how many cards are on the table in that top line on your playmat.
Yeah.
The other thing you should probably look at is the amount of total power that they have.
Yeah.
Because this is like representing potential all of it coming at you. And that's saying, like, I have this much power on board, plus whatever they have in their hand to pump their creatures or do some kind of overrun effect.
Yeah.
Are their creatures flying? Are they even harder to block? Do they have evasion? That's a really key thing.
Yeah.
Because then the damage that's represented on board is more likely to hit you.
Yeah.
I think there's, like, there's layers to how many creatures there are on board.
Totally. I mean, you can sort of, like, think about it. I like doing this with Magic sometimes, where you sort of, like, do it in the reverse order of going, like, imagine if you was, like, looking at someone's board and it was empty, but then they revealed a card in their hand that says target player loses 20 life and it costs 0 mana. You'd be kind of like, this seems like a problem.
Yeah, that also seems like a card that might come out in Commander Legends. We don't know.
Oh my god, I hope not.
Turn 1, 0 mana, half someone's life total. Thanks, Gavin Verhey.
Thanks so much, Gav. Yeah, no, but like that is what that amount of power represents on the board, and especially if it's like you say, evasive, like trample, flying, that kind of thing. I think the other thing you can look at is if someone has just one of those really problematic permanents.
Yeah,
I'm talking like Rhystic Study.
Wow, that's a really good call out.
Aetherflux Reservoir.
That's literally nicknamed the Death Star.
Yes, for good reason.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Aetherflux Reservoir is basically just a 4 mana, 5 mana artifact.
4, I think?
I think it might be 4. I think it's a 4 mana artifact. Mm-hmm. It sits on the battlefield and you gain a life for every spell you've cast this turn when you cast it. So you cast your first spell in the turn, you gain 1 life. Cast a second spell, you gain 2 life when you cast that spell.
Already great, by the way. If just that card was a 4 mana artifact, it would still see so much play.
Yeah, incredible. But the second line of text says, pay 50 life, which is a lot to pay, but you do 50 damage to any target.
Yeah.
So you full-blown Death Star Alderaan into a billion pieces. And Alderaan, by the way, is your friend's face. This is like really commonly seen in life gain decks because they can get to 100 life, pay 50 and boom someone on 30.
Or just like towards the end of a game when if it's just me and you playing and the other 2 players are eliminated. And I've got 50 life and you're on 35. It's just like, okay, well, if I get to 51... you're dead.
Game over.
That's the end of the game.
I think this is a section that you need to be experienced with Magic to understand. Because like Rhystic Study, Aetherflux Reservoir, great examples, but there are some permanents like, even low drop permanents. We're going to say later on how we think that lower mana value has less of an impact on the game. But like... Esper Sentinel is a recent card that does a very good impression of Rhystic Study. It's actually got the nickname Rhystic Buddy.
Yes.
So like that's a problematic permanent as well. That's a lot of value on a card. But I think this comes with a lot of experience playing Commander. You need to see permanents over and over again to be like, okay, I understand this is hyper problematic.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's like a Grave Pact, which is wherever a creature dies on an opponent's board, everybody sacks a creature.
Yeah.
That is a hyper problematic card, especially if someone's playing into that, like using an aristocrat strategy or something like that.
Yeah.
I think you need to be a little bit of an experienced Commander player to go, right, that is a problem because of these reasons.
Yeah. But in a similar vein, like if you are new to Commander and you're not aware of some of these things, keep an ear out for when the other players, even in jest, see someone play a spell and go, oops, threat.
Yeah.
When people start saying stuff like that and they've got quite a bit of experience playing Commander, take them seriously. Because I do see sometimes new players kind of doubting the influence of other players in the game. And I get it. They have their own vested interests. Obviously, we're all trying to win.
Yeah.
But sometimes someone is legitimately just trying to tell you, like... In fact, I love the opposite of this, which is when a new player says... what's the worst thing on the board right now? And then 3 people get to, like, make their case, and often 2 of those players will land on the same thing and go, actually, it's got to be Aetherflux here.
It is very academic when that happens, isn't it? I do love... we play a lot with new players within our community, and hopefully going to get to play with some new players at Command Fest this weekend. I can't wait to, give this knowledge that I've got built up over years of playing Commander and go, look, analysing the current board state, he's playing an aristocrat strategy, and he's only got... these 2 drain effects, but no free sacrifice outlet. So they're not as problematic right now. This guy's playing life gain, but it's not in this, really get to analyze it and help this new player out. But for new players, that information can just like overwhelm you and wash over.
Yeah.
So every single time someone points out a threatening card, just take a mental note of it. And actually, this episode, we're probably going to talk about a couple of really threatening cards.
I'd say so.
Take a note. Just if you hear the name Aetherflux Reservoir and that player over there that's playing the mono white Heliod life gain deck goes, I cast Aetherflux Reservoir, remember Walt and I in your ear being like, threat. Yeah. That's a threat. If you have your Wilt, cast that now.
Yeah. You're also more than welcome to, at the time when you see a permanent like that, rather than me and James's voice, you can also have a klaxon going off in your mind. That would also be more than welcome.
Rest in peace to all headphone users.
Yeah, I'm looking at that on the graph, and that is a scary spike, so I apologize.
When you said klaxon, I looked at you, I was like, do it. Make that noise.
Sometimes.
That's what happens in my head when I see an Aetherflux Reservoir.
Sometimes you just got to do it to him.
I actually hear the actual siren that sounded on the Death Star.
Oh,
like the...
Yeah, what was that sound? Yeah.
And then all the stormtroopers running down the hallway.
Yeah.
And then all the stormtroopers running through the hallway and one hitting his head.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
But yeah, threatening board states, very easy to identify, but there's some like level to it. And I think there are cards that you can easily point out. But there's layers to this.
There definitely are. And look, like, we're all like reasonably familiar with how these threats are going to look, and especially as you play more Commander, you will. But there's other things that might not be on the battlefield or in an obvious place that are still threatening to you that you may not be able to keep track of. And this is, something that we'll go into a little bit more later, into more depth later. But, like, for instance, cards in hand.
Yeah, this is one that often is really hard to see because a lot of people group their cards together. Like on Arena, for example, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because they're always fanned out.
Yeah.
They're always available. But usually when you're playing Commander, I'll like group my cards up into one pile and maybe put them on the table if I've planned my turn.
Yeah.
Because I know what I'm doing. I don't need to look at my hand and I can see everyone, talk to everyone. It's really hard to count a pile of cards. So 99% of the time, if you're threat assessing, you're not going to be able to secretly count cards.
No.
Usually you have to go, how many cards has everyone got in hand? And actually ask the question to get an accurate representation. However, if you're playing red and you ask that question, someone's going to think you're the threat because you're about to cast Jester's Will. When I said that, I was like, I ask this question a lot. Why do I do that?
Yeah.
It's because I play Jester's Will.
Yeah, which is a threatening card, definitely. Yeah, so it's not something that's immediately obvious, I agree. But it is something that you should be, I think, keeping... You don't have to know exactly all the time, but just like mentally note when someone draws like, any more than 4 cards in a turn. If someone draws 6, 7, 8 cards, you just got to think, like, even though they're discarding down to hand size, most likely at the end of that turn, you got to think, those are the best 7 cards from the top 15 cards of their library.
Yeah.
That is so threatening to you just conceptually,
There's this, like, phrase called sculpting your hand, which I really like in Magic, which,
I like it too.
When you're discarding down to hand size, that's what you're doing. You're saying, I don't need these cards, but I do need these ones. What you're doing is planning your next turn to, like, use your mana super efficiently. You'll see people when they're discarding be like, how much mana will I have next turn? If I can cast 2 5-drops, but I can't cast a 5 and a 6.
Yeah.
So I'll discard this 6-drop and keep, there is so much math in this game, and experienced players, when they are drawing this many cards, if they are having a full grip every turn, threat.
Yeah.
That is scary.
It's definitely scary. And the other thing that they might be doing, by the way, if they're drawing that many cards and they're playing a graveyard synergy, is they might be putting the right things they need into the graveyard, or just like having lots of stuff in the graveyard. There are so many ways to take advantage of having a bin that's really full, whether it be like stuff that cares about, creatures that's power and toughness equal number of cards in bin, or just, graveyard reanimation spells.
Well,
like, if you're playing against a graveyard person and they draw like 10 cards, discard 3 creatures, you've got to know they've got a graveyard recursion spell in hand.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about this just recently on the last episode of the podcast where we talked about all of your decks. But we specifically spoke about this in your Arami deck, because Arami encores permanence, and you can go back to that episode to figure out how that dumb mechanic works. But Gary Grey Merchant of Asphodel.
Yeah.
This is a really integral card to your game strategy. It's like a win con. If you encore that, you're doing what? Minimum...
It does... If Arami and all the Garys are on the battlefield when they resolve, the ETB resolves, it's minimum, everyone takes 21, I gain 63 life.
That is insanity.
Yeah.
You're a really lovely player, and you say, I have Gary in bin when it goes to graveyard.
Yes.
You're like very, hey everyone, just letting you know, this is a threat.
Yeah.
I love you for that, because I probably am not paying super close attention to what's in your graveyard,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't see your graveyard as a threat immediately if you didn't say it's in bin. But when you do, I'm like, hang on, next turn if he encores that, we're losing 21 life.
Yeah.
I'm going to cast this Rakdos Charm.
Yes.
Like, get rid of that.
Exactly. It's definitely like, it's less obvious, but it is still public information. So you can ask to see someone's graveyard, by the way, if they're not being as forthcoming as I sometimes am.
Yeah, sometimes to your own detriment.
Definitely. But you can ask someone, can I see the cards in your graveyard?
Yeah.
And they, by the way, like it's a rule of magic. They have to show you that. And it's the same, by the way, if you ever ask for how many cards someone has in hand. If someone says like, it doesn't matter or something, that's, by the way, illegal in the game of Magic. They have to tell you how many cards are in their hand.
And Commander's a casual format, but it still has rules.
Yeah, you can't just be like, I don't know.
Don't worry about it, bro.
Yeah,
like, at this point. But like the graveyard, yes, 100%, like a real thing. Also, like, you know, maybe some people have got like a synergy where cards in exile matter. If someone casts like a Commune with Lava, for example, in a Prosper deck, and they've got 1 million cards exiled, and they're all like really low cost, that player's about to blow up on their next turn.
Yeah.
Because every card they cast from exile is going to create them a treasure with Prosper. They're going to do things. There's going to be synergy there.
Totally.
There are zones that are public information that you should care about.
Yeah, totally. And I think the other thing is, like, I mean, you mentioned Prosper. Prosper is like the part of that puzzle that's also keeping that wheel turning. And so when you play enough Magic, you can start to just take stock of when someone is playing a like half of a well-known kind of 2 to 3 card synergy. So like, for instance, if someone plays Narset Parter of Veils...
Oh, someone's about to cast a Windfall.
They might be about to cast a Windfall.
Yeah.
So, by the way, the interaction here, Narset stops your opponents, so it's a Planeswalker, it stops your opponents as a static ability from drawing more than 1 card in their turn. If you cast Narset, if I cast Narset on my turn, and you're playing in the game, there's 2 other players, and I cast Windfall, everyone discards their hand... I draw equal to the greatest number of cards discarded this way, and everyone else will draw 1 card.
And everyone else on 1 card for the rest of the game unable to draw additional cards because of that Narset.
Yeah.
That is like game over, man.
Yeah, it's basically over.
Yeah.
Even a card like Disciple of the Vault.
This works really well with the Prosper example, actually.
Oh, yeah, because this is a treasure synergy.
Yeah,
yeah, 100%.
Super cool. So Disciple of the Vault is so good. It's banned in Pauper, by the way.
It is banned in Pauper.
It's a 1 mana black 1/1 that cares about when artifacts enter the battlefield.
No, when they leave
the battlefield. Sorry, yes.
I think when they're put into the graveyard specifically, because if you exile...
So you sacrifice. So treasures, for example, are a great example of this. You sacrifice 10 treasures, Disciple of the Vault deals 10.
Yeah.
This is insane.
Yeah.
It's really strong. Might look innocuous, but if they then cast, like, I don't know, a Brass's Bounty, and they generate 20 treasures...
It might just be game over.
It might just be game over. That threat right now looks like nothing, but in their hand, they could have... And this is all about this part of the threat assessment, is what could they have in their hand that makes their board 30 times better?
Yeah.
Like, have they got 1 10/10 and 31 ones? Do they have Overwhelming Stampede in their hand? It's kind of looking at the board state and going, right, if they have this in their hand, it's game over. So I need to threat assess that as a like real urgent possibility.
I think this is really related to, like, looking at the battlefield and finding those problem permanents and thinking about what could happen. This is really related to 2 things. One is one we've already talked about, which is how many cards they have in hand.
Yeah.
Right? Because the more cards you have, the more likely it is you've got the other half of that synergy, right? But the other thing is, we have tutors in our format, and they're very well played. So if someone casts Disciple of the Vault and then casts Demonic Tutor, you've got to think they are finding the absolute most synergistic card, probably with Disciple of the Vault, that they can possibly find.
Yeah, Brass's Bounty's a good hit.
Yeah.
That would be a great hit.
100%.
But like, this is like hard stuff to imagine, because this is why Magic is such a complicated game. Like chess, for example, chess is considered a open game. This means it's an open piece of information that you know every position on the board, you know where all your opponent's pieces are, and you know where all your pieces are. You know all the legal moves that you're allowed to make, and you know all the legal moves your opponents are allowed to make. Magic is a partially complete game.
Yeah.
Where you can see some of the information and know how some of it works legally, but you don't know some information, which is like what's in their library, what's in their hand, any hidden zones like face down exile. This is all stuff that's really hard to play at like high level Magic, and that's why sometimes like, you know, you watch the Pro Tour play and they're like thinking there for 20 minutes and you're like, it's not that complicated, man. Just swing. And they're like, nah, but I'm calculating whether or not they have like this one obscure bounce spell in their hand that like I know that they run in this archetype. And this is pro level Magic thinking right here.
Well, and the thing is, like, while we're not trying to play at that level, either of us, you know, this is a casual Commander format.
I'm like casting that Brass's Bounty and just hoping it works.
Yeah, like straight up. But in terms of like the comparison here, like those are 20 life 60 card 1v1 formats where the level of complication is that high.
Non-singleton as well.
Non-singleton. We play a singleton 100 card 4-player format. So that in terms of just the sheer amount of hidden information that we're going to encounter in a game, it's just vastly more, which also means there's just vastly more possible things that can happen that you have to think about.
Yeah.
So it's complicated, but try to take stock of what you can see and what you are aware of, like, you don't know the cards in their hand, but how many do they have? That kind of thing. And you should get a better idea about what is looking threatening. But we should come back a little bit to the command, which was about being the first threat and being the second threat.
So this is what we're seeing as a threat. If this is happening early, what happens to that player? If someone's presenting all of this threatening stuff that we've just happened, what happens to them?
They lose, right? Like their stuff
most of the time,
their stuff gets removed. They get their board, like either it's target removal, it might be a board wipe, like a mass removal spell, you know, a damnation sort of effect, or it might just be player removal. Like if I am that far ahead, you might have like 20 power on board and the ability to get through my blockers. You might just be like, well, I'm just gonna kill Walt.
Yep. Sometimes this happens in like a really political way as well. Like I've been in games, I do this quite a lot actually. If I have the ability to kill the problematic player that was like the first threat and has been the threat the whole game, I can look at the other two players at the table. Let's say you're the threat, Walt, and I've got player A and B next to me. I go, hey look, player A and B, we're all going to die to Walt pretty soon. He's been the threat for ages. He's got these on board. He's got 20 cards in his hand. We're all screwed. I can kill him right now. But I'd like a turn amnesty. My board doesn't get touched for a turn. Let me kill him and then we can play fun, fair Magic, right? By the way, use that. It's not trademarked. You can use that political deal as much as you like. It's phenomenal. Works every time.
I think there's a hidden patent on this, and I think it's got James Alvarez written all over it.
I get like a small, like little, like a check every time someone uses that political deal.
You've got like a loyalty program set up with the loyalty people.
I've got great lawyers.
But it's true. Like, it's something that does happen because people get threatening. Yep. And it gets to a point where it's like, cool, we can try blowing everything up, but it might be easier just to kill them.
Yeah, Arch Enemy is a format that was created because this happens in Commander.
Straight up. Like, and I think the important thing to keep in mind is, like, obviously, we don't want to lose. That's just like a given. But if we're talking just specifically from the perspective of just like enjoying playing Magic, we also just don't want to like be out of the game. Like I know we've said this before, but we enjoy like games that can be a little bit longer if they're close. Right?
Yes.
We want to be at the finish line. I mean, we don't have to be first to get into the finish line, but we want to be close. We want to see it. We want to have the other players in our periphery.
Yeah, my favorite games are when all four players are still alive at the very end.
Yeah,
and
anyone
just
can have it.
ekes out that win. That's like everyone's neck and neck, and it's like the photo finish Commander game. That's what we're all dying for, right?
100%. So I guess we should also ask at this point what it is to be too early. Like, what would happen if we're too early to being like that threat? You know, if we are that first threat and not the second threat. Like, what does it look like, and how do we know? And I think it's because we stand out, right?
Yes.
That's what it is. Like, you talk about the photo finish just now of us all being neck and neck. The reason the first threat gets eliminated is imagine it's the 100-meter sprint, but you've all got sniper rifles. Oh, mate, that's not a bad example. You've all got pistols.
We're not gun people.
No, we're not. A gun? What's that? But guns aren't legal in Australia. We don't know anything about them.
South America.
Okay, imagine we all got handguns, all right? We've got
Mexican
two handguns.
standoff style.
Yeah, but we're not neck and neck in the race, right? There's someone who is like in the lead, like comfortably in the lead in the 100-meter race, like surely, maybe you got one bullet in your pistol. You're like, well, I might have a chance against these two people next to me. I'm definitely going to shoot that guy.
Yeah,
right?
I think your two other opponents that are running behind that leader are also like, I might shoot him as well, actually, because I'm also going to lose. 3 people fire the same bullet at the same guy. I think this is really important to like not identify if you're getting too far ahead, because honestly, like thinking back to my early days of playing Commander, I loved being the first threat, and I think I've learnt from this a little bit. There is an expression in our community called Jamesing all over the place. It sounds so gross, but it's an expression to represent dumping all of your mana rocks or mana dorks or mana acceleration of any kind onto the battlefield and then being left with no cards in hand.
Yes.
This is called Jamesing all over the place now, which I think is fine, but I do really hate when I'm at the game store and someone from across the room, 6 tables away from me, is like, "Oh man, James, I just Jamesed all over the place." I'm like, that's weird.
This is so weird. This is the one phrase that is used commonly in the games that we play that will never appear on merch ever.
Yeah.
If we ever do merch, there is no chance.
All over the place is never ever going to be on a t-shirt.
Not ever. I'm sorry to say. Yeah, I think you definitely, early games of Commander that we played, you were someone who was like, dump all your cards.
Yeah, get a really powerful commander out. I used to play like really expensive commanders. Like I still have my Gishath deck.
Yeah.
I used to play Gulta as well.
Yeah.
Like I used to play these really expensive commanders that just were a lightning rod for removal, but also like got me really insanely close to winning if I just resolved them and one other spell.
Yeah.
I used to love those archetypes. I genuinely look at those and I'm like, that's not what I'm about now. For example, I used to run like Brutaclad, Telecore Engineer. That's a 6 mana commander that makes tokens makes all your tokens a copy of target token you control.
Yeah. So you got 5 Mia and you got 1 treasure, you can make all of those 6 tokens into treasures.
Or if you have a Desolation Twin token that's a 10/10, you can turn them all into 10/10s and swing for a freaking million damage.
Yeah.
I now have completely destroyed that deck and rebuilt it as Tornos, which is a 2 mana commander that copies activated and triggered abilities from artifacts. It's not the win con, it's the way to get the deck working. And I think my deck building has changed a lot, but also like the way I approach the early game has changed a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot more set up, not explode and James all over the place. I hate that phrase so much.
It's so bad.
It's really endearing that you all say it, but like,
stop it,
please.
But I totally see where you're coming from. I think, yeah. Look, I reckon it's almost time for a thrifty interlude. But I reckon the second half of the episode we should talk about, I think there's 2 aspects of it, which is how can we build our decks so that we are the second threat, and how do we pilot our decks so that we become the second threat? Because I think there's 2 different approaches that we have there. But combined, we can fly under the radar so that, we're towards the finish line with everybody else.
And I think, it is important to think about both these things. We'll get to that.
Definitely. But before that, we do have to have a little thrifty interlude. So we're going to hear a little something about a thrifty card. And as is tradition, I will be performing a monologue. This week, the card is brought to life in monologue form from the perspective of someone who is in the card.
Ooh.
Kind of. This episode's card, would you like to read it out to everybody, James?
Yeah, it's Acolyte of Affliction. So we're going to hear the Acolyte of Affliction.
Maybe?
All right,
I'm not certain who's talking here. I know that they're weird, and I know that it's related to what's occurring in the card.
Thoroughly concerned, but we'll find out what the card does. The card is Acolyte of Affliction. It's 2 black and a green. You get a human cleric that's a 2/3. And when it enters the battlefield, you mill 2 cards, and then you may return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand.
I'm brewing a tincture of delight, but it's not for you. No, this is reserved for a very special someone. My curious customers are always asking me, who's that for? What's that going to do? And how quickly does it work? And the answer is, you kill, and immediately. If you ever ask me things like that which aren't for you to know. But this little concoction is going to change the world. For the better Who's to say? I am but a simple potion maker. Let's just say that our world is about to have one less giant lizard in it. And I'm not talking about my precious Parenti over there. Which reminds me, Charles, kill the witness now! Get butted out!
Oh, it's so delightful to see you in someone else's body from the world of Magic the Gathering. And whoever that dude was...
That
strange little trinket tinkerer potion maker man. Never want to see that person in my living room.
No, that's fair enough. You can see these really, really strange pieces of writing when they're released, which is every Thursday in our Thrifty Thursdays channel over on our Discord server. It's linked in the show notes. And you can see us bring some of these to life in video form over on TikTok at Get Commanded. But we better get back to the second threat, the topic of this episode. And I think we were going to focus on how to construct your deck and how to pilot your deck so that you are the second threat.
Yes, because the second threat is likely to win.
Yep.
The first threat is likely to die because kill the player that plays turn 1 Sol Ring.
Yes. Use your handgun in the sprint.
Great metaphor, by the way. You
one of
ran
my
with
better
that
ones.
one.
Yeah. I ran with my handgun.
Yeah.
So, how do you build a deck so that you are the second threat? There's a few different things you can do, I reckon. I think the main one that comes to mind for me, like, immediately, is just play fewer bombs.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, if you play draft, which is a format where you have to build a deck on the fly, where you pass to the left and then pass to the right of packs, but you choose one card from that pack before you pass it on.
It's past the parcel, but it's a pack.
Yeah, and when you open your pack, you're going to see a mythic symbol in the corner of the card, and you're going to like, I'm taking that because that is a bomb.
Oh, you know what? It's way worse past the parcel, because it's past the parcel, but you open a layer and then go, I don't like this, I'm going to take the middle. That's for you know how the middle of the past the parcel was always for the birthday person, because it'd go round and round and we're all going, who's it going to land on? And then it lands on the birthday person, they get the thing in the middle. Imagine like rocking up at a party, you open the first layer and you're like,
nah, don't like it. Punch through the wrapping paper. Give me that Xbox controller. Man, my past the parcels were sick if they had Xbox controllers on them.
Far out.
But I get what you're saying. It's like when you open a pack in draft and you see the bomb, you take it because that's going to win you the game.
Yeah.
In Commander, we have every legal bomb in draft that has ever been printed.
Yeah.
That we can just throw in our Commander decks.
Yeah.
And there is so much reason to include as many as we want.
Yeah.
Because they're great cards. These are cards that are usually like probably in the rare or mythic rare slot in a set. And they're usually more than 4 mana, 5 mana.
Yeah.
They're usually these really expensive effects that if you resolve them, it's just like you're in a commanding position. Now, we're saying play less of these.
Not play none of them at all.
Yes. These are really still good to include in your decks, but the reason why we're saying play less of them is because if you have a ton in your deck and you're just casting one after the other, you are immediately a threat.
Yeah.
Immediately. So people will kill you. So what we're going to try and do here is make a rational case of why not to put that incredible $70 mythic card that you got from that draft that one time in your deck.
Just put one of them in, is what we're saying.
That's
put
a
that
great reason.
one mythic rare. Yeah. Don't go into the other double masters box and pull out any more of them.
Put down your trade binder. You can sell those cards for more singles.
It's true. Like, you know, a card like Avenger of Zendikar, for instance. Like, this is a very, very strong card, but it costs you 7 mana. Yep. And how often does Avenger of Zendikar last a turn cycle? I would say, hazard a guess, it's less than 50% of the time.
If I've got a removal spell and there's someone playing Landfall and they've got Avenger of Zendikar with like at least 4 plants, like if they've got 4 plants left and they've still got Avenger of Zendikar on field, it is still hyper-threatening to me.
Yeah.
I am casting my Go for the Throat on the Avenger of Zendikar.
And it's the correct choice to make, 100%. But if we were to include a card like Sprout Swarm
This
instead,
is a personal favourite of yours.
Yeah,
though,
look,
so
I'm a little biased. This is for 1 and a green. It's an instant that says, create a 1/1 green sapling.
It's incredible. What a great sorcery speed spell. Instant speed spell.
It also has Convoke. Seems pretty good. So you can tap your creatures to pay for it. also has buyback.
All right, now we're getting somewhere.
So it has buyback for 3 generic, which means if you pay 5 mana in total for the instant, then you put it back into your hand after it resolves. So you make that sapling, the spell goes back into your hand. Importantly, you can pay the buyback cost with the Convoke.
Yeah.
So you can just, if you have 5 creatures on the board and one of them's green, at least one of them, you can tap those 5 creatures, cast this for free, make a sapling, and have that spell back in your hand.
Now you're probably going, but Walt, 5 mana for an instant speed spell that makes me 1 sapling? That's terrible. However, if you're in a strategy that wants to play Avenger of Zendikar and you're creating a bunch of tokens,
yeah,
this is like, I get to hold up 5 mana on my turn to either respond, protect my board, make a threat, or like remove something that if I need to, use removal.
Yeah.
But if nothing happens on the end step before my turn, just poop out like 5 saplings because I've got 15 open mana.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, exactly right. And importantly, this is not gonna sit on the battlefield where it can be removed, like Avenger of Zendikar can, right? Like, unless someone's got a counterspell, they're not really dealing with Sprout Swarm. It's not gonna happen.
Or they're like playing Duress in Commander, which is really terrible.
A bad idea.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think we see where we're coming from, which is that Avenger of Zendikar sits on the battlefield, draws removal like it's nobody's business.
Yeah.
He's still a good card, but like compared to a card like Sprout Swarm, doesn't have as much immediate impact,
Yep.
but over the course of the game, much more likely to keep the value that you generate there.
All right, we'll do another example. Bolos' Citadel.
Yeah, this is like the bomb to end all bombs.
It's terrifying because it gets you more bombs from the top of your library.
The wild thing about Bolos' Citadel is that it has more text on it.
Yeah, everyone forgets about that last line of text. For those that don't know, the first line of text on Bolos' Citadel is you can look at the top card of your library and you may cast it, but using life instead of mana to pay for the mana cost.
Yeah.
But there's a second line of text that everyone forgets about that says tap and sacrifice
10 non-land permanents.
Do you have to sacrifice Bolos' Citadel
No.
as well? Oh, wow, this is insane.
Yeah.
You tap and sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, and you drain everyone for 10.
Yeah, each opponent loses 10 life. I think you might even gain the 10 as well. It doesn't matter. I've literally gotten to the end of a game and someone's like, man, I don't know how I do lethal. Oh, right. Tap, sacrifice 10
win.
non-land permanents.
It's insane.
Yeah.
This card is ridiculous, especially that first line of text where you're just casting stuff from the top of your library. If you're doing this, you have got so much value on all of your extra players, you are going to be removed. The other thing, it's going to be easier for players to remove you because you're using your life as a resource. People will just keep punching you until that Bolos' Citadel means jack shit.
Yeah, it's going to go in some way or another, whether it's exiled from your board as part of you being exiled from your board, or if it's removed, it's going to go. It's a lightning rod for removal.
Yeah.
Again, you can play it. It's fine to play it, but don't have only Avenger of Zendikar Bolos' Citadel in your deck. Have, instead, Greed.
Greed's a really good parallel here because Greed also uses life as a resource, which is really cool.
Yes.
But it's drawing you cards instead of casting cards for free. Drawing cards is still incredibly good. But if there are 2 board states and someone is playing Bolos' Citadel and someone else is playing Greed, I am like ignoring the Greed. You know? You know that episode of Doctor Who where they wear a TARDIS key as a necklace? And it like
the eyes just slide off people.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? That is what playing Greed is when someone else is playing Bolos' Citadel. Everyone just like forgets you're in the game and you're like, I'm just going to pay 2 life and draw an extra card. I'll do it again.
Yes.
I'll do it again. I now have 3 extra cards in my hand and no one noticed.
Forgive me, all those people who don't know anything about Doctor Who. I'd like to indulge this metaphor even further.
By the way, both of us are huge Doctor Who nerds. We're really excited for the Doctor Who Commander decks.
Absolutely.
We will probably talk about it on this podcast.
We will. I'm going to take it a little bit further. Imagine instead of people's eyes sliding past it, like the Greed, right? People's eyes are sliding past it. I think it would be a more accurate representation of like Doctor Who, the Doctor, Rose, Martha, whoever's with him on that episode is putting the keys on, right?
Yeah.
To distract everybody. And Captain Jack is nude.
running
next
into battle
to them,
with a laser gun in hand. Like, look at me, I'm going to save the day. And then a Cyberman's just like, delete.
Yeah.
Boom, it's gone.
Yeah, exactly. No one is looking for Jack and Rose when Captain Jack is naked. And has a gun. Sorry, the gun's really important. It's not the nudity. No.
I'm not looking at Captain Jack Harkness because he's naked at all.
What?
John Barrowman's not attractive at all. He's not just an incredibly handsome man that's also gay.
Wow. All right, moving on.
Back to Commander. This might be the first episode where we edit something out.
Seedborn Muse is a very strong magic card.
That's a great bomb. That is a really good example.
Very, very good. It draws removal for a good reason, right?
Yeah.
Like, when you have Seedborn Muse, you are floating like a million mana. It's normally in a deck like a Crewfix deck, right?
Yeah. Or decks that just basically have flash. In
like
every scenario.
A Thrasios deck has an instant speed mana outlet at all times. So having mana open is perfect, because if nothing else happens, you just pay 4 mana into Thrasios, scry 1, draw a card. It's great.
And then with Seedborn Muse, when they pass the turn, you untap all of your lands and you take another turn on someone else's turn.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. But it gets removed a lot of the time. And it should. However, we have a recent card that is not the same, but similar, and I would argue flies under the radar, maybe just because it's not called Seedborn Muse.
Sure.
Drum Bellower? Are you familiar with this?
I think this has flown under my radar.
Ah, okay.
Not familiar.
I'm not going to quote the text exactly because I'm sure I'm wrong. It's like a 3 mana creature. I think it's 2 and a white.
Sure. That's probably why I haven't looked at it.
I forget what its power toughness. It might have flying. I think it's a spirit, but it says untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step.
Wow, so if you're in a deck with a lot of mana dorks, this is basically Seedborn Muse for you?
Yeah, but not Seedborn Muse because you're not untapping all your lands.
Yeah.
So it's not going to draw that amount of removal.
And you're also saying I'm casting what is it called?
Drum Bellower? Yeah.
No one's going, oh yeah, cool. Oh no, Drum Bellower.
Don't bellow the drum!
Oh my god, what a threat. But if you go, I'm casting Seedborn Muse, people are like, oh my god, that's a card that needs reprinting and cost people a lot of money.
Gotta make that die!
Yeah.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, I think that's one way we can build our decks to the second
fewer
threat.
bombs in is a
fewer
great
bombs,
way. Yeah.
more synergy. That's one thing we can do. I think another thing we can do, and Sam Black would be proud of us for saying this, we can just play with a lower mana curve in our deck, right?
Yeah,
we can just take out some of those 6, 7, even 5 mana value spells, put in more of those 1, 2, 3 mana value spells, because as we found with all of those examples, by the way, that we just gave, lower mana value permanents generally just attract less attention than higher mana value permanents do.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about like the 1-for-1 exchange of me casting a removal spell on your bomb, I'm going up here in value because my go for the throat is 2 mana. Your Avenger of Zendikar is 7 mana.
Yeah.
So I'm casting 2 mana to basically null and void your 7 mana that you've spent to invest into that. That's a great exchange. I'm not casting my Bedevil, which is 3 mana, to get rid of a Drum Bellower, which is 3 mana.
No.
Even though it's an even exchange, I feel like it could be better put to use by getting rid of someone's, I don't know, like a Chroma.
Yeah.
Or like something incredible. Like,
yeah, I mean, like, the mana advantage is a huge one, but it's also just like, it's not, like, why would you do it? You know, you're looking at it and you're kind of like, I have this one removal spell. I don't think this is the target for it, you know?
Yeah, again, it's that weird metaphor that you put. If you've got one bullet to use in your race, in your running race that apparently has guns in it now, you're not going to use your one bullet on something that you don't think is a threat.
No, you're going to use it on that thing that has to go right now. It's my one bullet. I have to use it.
The other benefit of playing a lower mana curve is that you can play more of the things in your hand.
Yeah.
Which means that you're generally producing more synergy in your deck and on your board state, which collectively have that TARDIS key shift the eyes away from it, but can generate you a ton of mana. I used my Tornos deck as an example before. I actually think my Tornos deck is a perfect example of this. A lot of the artifacts that I play in that deck are very low mana value. I have like a few bombs. For example, I run Memnite, great bomb. It's insane. It's ridiculous. It's 7 mana though. Not casting that a lot, but I am casting things like Golden Urn, which is a 1 mana artifact that you put a charge counter on it in your upkeep, and you sacrifice it to gain 1 life for each charge counter on it. Are you casting your targeted Abrade to get rid of that?
No.
No, you're not.
I can say, having played against this deck several times, it's a problem that I have. Like, I'm looking at your board, and I'm like, I know something's got to go, but everything feels bad. Like,
Yeah,
why
and
am I
also,
wasting a
what's the
removal
most
spell?
threatening thing for me to get rid of?
Well, and most of the time it's Tornos, and Tornos costs 2 mana.
Yeah, I love my Tornos deck because it does basically everything that we're saying here. It plays a much lower mana curve, it plays fewer bombs, and it creates more synergy on board that draws less removal.
Yeah.
But honestly, Tornos is probably one of my most consistent decks at the moment. It's winning me the most amount of games. I think it's because I made this decision when I was deck building.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, you can think of it even as just like, imagine that your board has like 100 points of value on it, right? Like I'm looking at my battlefield, I'm looking at my playmat, I've got 100 points of value
Where do
across
you
the whole
assign
board.
the percentages of that 100?
Yeah, exactly. And then consequently, when someone gets rid of one of the things that I have, how much percentage am I losing? So yeah, when I tap out to cast Avenger of Zendikar, the percentage of my board that's like, you know, the amount of power I'm getting from Avenger of Zendikar is probably like 70%, which is great. But when it's removed, I've just lost 75% of my deck.
And that feels so bad.
Yeah.
From like an emotional place.
Yeah.
If someone removes your bomb that you've just invested a ton of mana in and you're like, this is going to win me the game, and someone's like, Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah.
And you're like,
yeah, like, and you've lost, you know, 70 of your points there. But yeah, when you play a deck like your Tornos deck, where you spread it across all those different ones, I can remove your Golden Urn, but your Golden Urn's like 10% of your board, you know? Like, the amount of power that's condensed there is so low that removing it even feels bad. And so I probably won't even remove it at all, which is like the absolute best outcome for you, right?
Yeah, and there's also like a Lux Cannon on my field, which is a 4 mana, really slow, really bad removal spell.
Yeah.
You have to charge it up and get 3 charge counters on it, then you can tap it to remove a permanent. On the surface, that looks terrible.
Yeah.
So no one's going to remove it.
No.
But over a game, I'm removing 8 permanents with this card.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Because it flies under the radar.
And because no one cares about it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think my Tornos deck is only going to get away with this for so much longer because we're talking about it on the podcast now. And I know that people I play with listen to this podcast.
It's true. It's one of those ones now.
no.
It'll be the same way you play your Tornos deck and people are like, I know what to do here.
Get rid of Golden Urn.
It's Golden
Get rid of that Golden Urn.
It's got to go.
It's going to gain me like 17 life. Just you wait.
I feel like my most recent deck that I've built is probably a similar kind of thing, which is my Humans deck, which I've talked about a few times now.
Yeah.
This is my Catilda and Leah. It's Bant, so white, green, blue deck. Basically wants to cast Humans and give instants and sorceries in my graveyard flashback until end of turn.
Yeah.
One thing this deck does really well is all of the things that I want to do cost almost no mana, but actually have quite an impact on the game because I'm like using them multiple times.
Well,
so
like your removal is doubly good because you're casting a human and flashing it back from graveyard and removing something again.
Yeah.
And that's a threat in your graveyard that is flying under the radar as well.
yeah,
So good.
Exactly. But then like even the humans that I cast, I actually want them to be low in mana value because I want to be able to like cast them and then cast something else. But in looking for like low mana value humans that had a lot of impact, there's quite a few of them. Like even just like Catilda Dawnheart Prime, this one makes all your humans tap for a mana of their colors. So like white humans tap for white, green humans tap for green, etc. It's a 2 mana value spell, so if it gets removed, it's whatever. But so much of the time it flies under the radar, and I'm generating like 5, 6, 7 mana a turn more than I would normally just from having this one creature out.
Imagine if a mana rock cost 2 mana but tapped for 8.
Yeah.
That's what that is on Walt's board, but is flying under the radar because it doesn't read like that. It reads a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, like, a bit of a shout out to Catilda and Leah here. They're an example of a commander that does not draw heat.
No.
It seems like so many hoops to jump through that no one's like, I need to remove this.
Yeah.
You know, everyone's looking at that going, Walt's got to do a million things to get value off this. I'm not removing that.
And look, they're partly right. Like, the deck is not amazing. But yeah, it flies under the radar, which is a good thing to be the second threat. I think, so that's, I think, a good bit of stuff to focus on when you're building your deck, or like adjusting your deck, whatever, what you can do to be the second threat. The other, obviously, really important thing, we've kind of alluded to this a few times, is how you actually play your deck out.
Actually piloting is, like, really key, because, like, you could have a Soul Ring in your opening hand. Do you play it turn 1?
Yeah,
I have resisted playing turn 1 Soul Rings for the exact reason of making sure I'm not the first threat in a game.
It's amazing the difference between a turn 1 Soul Ring and a turn 2 Soul Ring. The accumulative effect across your whole game might be similar, but the amount of heat you draw might be really different. So I think the main focus for the first part of this is hidden information is your friend.
Yeah.
And when we say the hidden information, basically we mean your hand. Your cards in your hand are known only to yourself, unless people are cheating. So you can keep it that way. You can keep things in your hand for quite a while, and people will not know that you might be on the verge of victory for like several turns and biding your time.
You could just be like holding that overwhelming stampede.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that, like, you know, what's the Adeline, that new mono white legendary creature that gets huge in your token deck is like just at lethal point with the amount of tokens you have.
Yeah.
Then you can cast overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably the first tip I would say is refrain from deploying those really big threats until you absolutely have to. And usually the answer to absolutely have to is because you're about to win or someone else is about to win. So you just got to do something right now. So yeah, like, you know, you said overwhelming stampede. In my humans deck, I play Kamal, Heart of Crosa.
Oh, this is like overrun every combat on a creature, right?
Yes, and also can make your lands into creatures and then they can get bigger. It's like just an absolute bomb. 8 mana creature though, like it costs a lot of mana.
Big boy.
But even if I have 8 mana, I'm often waiting like 2 to 3 turns before I actually cast it, because as soon as Kamal's on the battlefield, people are like...
the board state first.
Well, yeah, but also people can see it. They're like, okay, I know you're close to the win. I see your win con right there, and I know that just removing it is the way to stop your win con.
Yeah, if you get 2 more creatures, you've got all of us dead, like in a couple of turns. I'll just get rid of it now, solve the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly what the first threat would do, right? Is play out those huge bombs and draw all the heat. But if you're going to be the second threat, hold those cards in your hand. Keep the hidden information hidden. Yeah,
and I think that the next step to that, if you're refraining from like casting your big threats and putting your bombs that you do have in your deck on the battlefield, instead of spending your mana in that, put your mana somewhere else. And I'm like, my perfect place to put mana is drawing cards, for example.
Yeah.
If I can draw cards and sculpt my hand and make it easier to find the line that will get me the win, I'll do that for like 2 turns and make myself seem really non-threatening. Like, I have done it before where I've managed to convince people that I am nowhere near winning because I don't have it on board yet, but I've drawn 20 cards in the past 2 turns, and I've got the perfect 7 in my hand that if I deploy this on a turn, I should be able to just win the game.
This is the exact opposite side of the advice we gave you in the first half about identifying threats. James is the threat there, but he's doing so in a way that's not immediately obvious.
Yes.
It might be obvious to some people who have been playing Magic for a long time.
But because I've drawn 20 cards over 2 turns... I'm threatening.
He's threatening, but he's not doing so in a way that's obvious. Like, he's not playing out, you know, like that busted artifact or that Kamal Heart of Crosa. You're keeping them in your hand.
I might just cast this, like, you know, power conduit. It's nothing. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and like, I think so much of the time when I've watched really, really good Magic players, not necessarily play Commander, but just in general, when they don't have like the perfect sequence of plays, they just draw cards. Yeah. And I think it's the right thing to do. Like, I think if you don't have the right cards to play right now, like if you have a removal spell and there's no good targets for your removal spell, don't play it just because it's in your hand. Play that Harmonize. Draw 3 cards. You'll probably find your way into a better line.
And also, especially instant speed stuff.
Yeah.
Hold that in your hand. Doing that in your main phase at sorcery speed is so much worse than what you think it is.
Yeah.
It, like, yes, it's removing a threat, but if you hold it in your hand and wait for all 3 opponents to make their next turn, there might be an even more threatening thing in those 3 turns that they take, and then after they've taken your turns, you can re-threat assess and go, oh, that Avenger of Zendikar actually isn't the threat.
Yeah.
This Akroma is the threat. Or this Krenko is now terrifying. That's like really good Magic playing, is waiting until the very last moment to use your resources.
Well, and also in terms of who's the threat in that circumstance, you might, with that removal spell as a factor, like removing the absolute worst thing on the board, you might effectively be in the best seat now. You know what I mean?
100%.
By not playing it for a little while, you can make everyone think that the other player is the problem. They're the first threat, right? They're the one who's got that really problematic permanent over there. And before your turn, when you remove that, you might suddenly have your opponents looking around and going, wow, I think James is in the lead now.
Because now I get a whole turn where I can develop a winning board state and you have to rebuild your whole game plan because I removed your win con.
It's amazing. A well-timed removal spell can literally flip the course of a game completely. It's amazing.
One of my favorite expressions in Magic is, oh yeah, negate.
Well, and speaking of that, I think like one other thing you can do if you're not going to be drawing cards is using your mana on spells that aren't permanent. Like, when I say that, I mean instants and sorceries, basically.
Well, they're not... If an opponent doesn't have a counterspell in hand or a response to that effect right now, you're going to have that effect resolve, gain the value from it, and then no one can hurt you after that, or no one can get rid of that threat. It's already happened.
Yeah.
For example, if you're casting a big draw spell and you're drawing a bunch of cards, unless someone can respond to that Mind Spring on the stack, you're going to redraw all those cards.
Well, and as we found out last week, even James, the counterspell master, is not playing that many counterspells in Commander. You really I think so much of the time people are planning for counterspells, and they do happen, but so much less than you think that they will in Commander. Mostly people are playing removal, they're playing spells that protect their permanents, they're not playing counterspell, the card, or arcane denial, the card.
I will resist my urge to rant again 2 episodes in a row on counterspells in Commander, but
It's true.
I totally agree.
Yeah. I think the other thing you can do to be that second threat is to go, if you are going to go off, like if it is your time to go, you know, you've drawn the spells, you've done the removal, you've done all that stuff,
you've sculpted your hand,
you're ready to go, you've got the bombs in hand, go off when someone else is ahead.
Oh, that's like the perfect time to do it too.
Yeah.
And especially you can scale how much you go off to make sure that you're not going off more than the person that's currently in the lead.
Yeah.
So you can still say, like, they're more threatening than I am, and politic your way for player removal on that person, and then just go that extra level and be like, oh no, I'm now at full 900 power.
Yeah. This is, I think, something that I've noticed separates good, like really good Commander players from just like okay Commander players, is when people have identified that the tide is about to turn. Like when the first threat is about to be eliminated, you'll often see really good players will go I know I could kill this player now, but actually doing so puts this person way in the lead.
Yeah, you might hear the phrase like, I'll probably die on the crackback if I remove this player. Like if I swing out at Walt, I don't know, Johnny over there might be developing a board state that can kill me before I get to untap and have blockers again. This is a real thing. It's like watching an old person when they know it's about to rain. That's a really good analogy for this. You know when they're like, I feel it in my bones. I know Walt's about to play glunch. It's gonna happen.
It's glunch time.
It's glunch time. It's about to rain treasure on my... You just spat water all over yourself.
No, I didn't. I don't know what you're talking about.
We totally need a camera for this podcast.
Not this one. This one can go off camera, I think.
Look, I think that there's some really good tips there on how to make sure that you're piloting your deck to be the second threat.
Yep.
However, I want to propose there is ways you can play a game of Commander without being a threat at all and win.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on that?
Look, I think that there's certain deck archetypes, and I'm going to call out a famous archetype in Commander that often results in them being removed first because there's the expression, remove the group hug player first.
Group hug.
So group hug is, if for those that don't know, is an archetype of deck which maybe, I don't know, the Space Commanders might abduct us and ask us to build group hug one day.
Maybe someday.
But group hug, the whole strategy of the deck is to play effects that benefit the entire table. So we're talking like cards like Rites of Flourishing, for example. People can play an extra land on their turn. That's sick. Dictate of Karametra. All lands tap for double mana. That's insane.
Yeah.
Dictate of Crewfix. Every player draws an extra card in their turn.
Yep.
What? These are like effects that group hug players are doing to be like, I'm speeding up the whole game, so don't remove me. You're getting benefits from me. I'm not a threat to you because my board is helping your board.
Well, and the secret tech behind the group hug player is that they are benefiting from that scenario more than everybody else is.
Yes, they've built their deck specifically to.
Yes, that's the whole point. Otherwise, if they're rocketed everyone up ahead the same amount, then they would not win any more often than anybody else. But yes, group hug players intentionally fly under the radar. And funnily enough, as like a sort of backlash to that of probably a lot of group hug players winning games.
Yeah.
People now have, the expression you mentioned before, which is kill the group hug player first, because the group hug player has designed their deck for that long game, for the game where the first threat gets eliminated and then they go, oh, would you look at that? I have lethal damage on everybody.
How convenient. You weren't looking.
I don't know how this happened, guys.
What the hell? I think something else group hug players do is they design their mana curve to be like everything within 1 to 5 mana is all group hug stuff. It's all benefiting the table, doing all that. Then their 6 mana, 7 mana, 8 mana slot is just packed with bombs.
Yeah.
So after the table has been developed and people are close to death, they can just be like, okay, Elishnorn.
Yeah.
Now everything dies, my things are huge, swing, you're dead.
Or even like Insurrection,
Yes, oh my god. That's getting reprinted in Commander Masters. Have you seen that?
It is, I did see that. I saw there was some people who were a bit upset that it's been reprinted at Mythic, because they're like,
it might feel bad to draft it.
Well, also, like, if you're just opening packs and you're like, oh, I wonder what my Mythic is in this pack, and it's Insurrection, you're kind of like, it's okay.
It's still cool. I like the card Insurrection.
It's a great card. And yeah, if you're playing Group Hug and you're giving everyone all the resources and it's like, cool, deploy all your threats. Yeah, do it now. I'll take them.
Yeah, and now you're dead with your resources. Yeah, I love it.
Exactly.
But I think there is another archetype of deck that can win without being a threat until the very last second. Mm-hmm. Combo decks.
This is what I was thinking when you asked if you can be a threat and, like, not for the whole game.
Yeah.
This, I would say, is kind of the other side of the coin, where I actually think this is a problem with combo decks in casual pods.
Well, I used to run my CDH deck, my now CDH deck, when it wasn't fully CDH. I used to run my Niv Mizzet Curiosity combo list, which is a 2-card combo that part of it sits in the command zone with Niv Mizzet.
There's also, it doesn't have to be Curiosity, there's like 2 other effects in the deck.
Ophidian Eye, Tandem Lookout.
Yeah.
It basically results in infinite draw, which is incredible, and infinite ping damage.
Yeah.
I say infinite, it is limited to the amount of cards in your deck.
Yes.
But there are ways you can make it infinite with a Titan Shuffle or
close
whatever.
enough.
You're winning the game if you're machine gunning everyone down with that combo.
Yeah.
But when I used to play this in casual tables, I was like, alright, ramp some mana, do some stuff, my board's empty, I got no creatures. Cast Niv Mizzet, cast Curiosity, go infinite, win.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, what?
Yeah. You feel kind of cheated out of the game a little bit. And I think, honestly, like, as a casual player who has played a lot in this kind of power level slot, I think people are right to feel a bit upset about that, right? Like, everything we've mentioned in the first half of this episode about analyzing threats, about being the second threat, all of that stuff goes out the window as soon as someone plays a combo. Because it's like, cool, like, yeah, maybe...
Or an instant win infinite combo.
Yeah. I had very little ways to know this was coming. Like, yeah, maybe someone drew 10 cards or whatever, but like, I didn't know this was the explicit end of the game, and it sort of feels like it invalidates everything that happened before. We're not saying you can't play combos. You should definitely mention them in the Rule Zero conversation. And I think, this is probably a way that you can legitimately be not a threat for the entire game and still win. But I would say, like, tread cautiously, because it's likely to cause a good number of people to feel pretty salty, myself included.
And also, like, consider doing what I did. Retire that deck from casual and see if there's a CDH build that plays that combo. If you really enjoy winning out of nowhere and playing that combo line to win the game, you might actually really like CDH.
Yeah.
We did an episode fully on CDH and busted some myths about how it isn't what a lot of people think it is, full of really competitive, sweaty players. It's a really great community. Lots of fun. We play CDH I play a little bit more than you do.
Yeah.
But it's a great community. Try it out. If you're trying to play your Spellseeker combo with that new Esper commander that's weird and requires a million steps, looking at you, Jordan, who listens to this podcast, you might want to like change that to a CDH list. And I know Jordan has got a CDH list with this commander because he found that combo so attractive. So check it out.
Yeah. If nothing else, give it a go, because it'll give you a sense for what the top of our format looks like, and it actually lets you scale it down way better.
Yeah, 100%.
So, when you play Commander, you're going to become the threat at some point, but doing it early will result in a lot of early losses. Building your deck around synergy pieces instead of bombs, and piloting cautiously and secretively will mean that when you hit that final stretch of the game, you got plenty of gas in the tank to sprint over the finish line. So, Space Commanders, command received!
This episode feels like the core of Get Commanded.
It does feel very like our typical, here's how to navigate the murky waters of playing a game that's competitive and casual at the same time.
And just incredibly complicated.
Yes.
But to the listeners, do you feel commanded? What do you think about the idea of being the second threat? And I really want to know if you are usually the first threat, and I'd love to know your win percentage. Because if you are someone that is the first threat, you're probably dying first.
Yeah, a good chunk of the time. Or maybe you are pub stomping. It's
Maybe
a real
you just
possibility.
need to decommission a deck.
It's true. It's possible. The best way to get in touch with us is by either sending us an email or joining our Discord server is the absolute best way to do so. It's linked in the show notes. You can chat with us, other members of our playgroup, and we'd like to ask you also to follow us on Twitter to see our thoughts on upcoming cards, sets, events, other Magic the Gathering updates. We just talked about how Commander Masters is coming.
Yeah, we'll be sharing our thoughts there for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
They're reprinting the medallions. Sorry, I couldn't resist. It's so exciting.
Everyone was hoping, and it's actually happening. It's great news. It's at Get Commanded to follow our Twitter.
Yeah, and also we'll be announcing when we're at events because we're going to Command Fest.
Yeah.
So follow us to keep up to date. But if you want to support what Walt and I are doing and keep getting great episodes like this and seeing it get better, I keep saying that we need video evidence of Walt spilling water on himself. So if you want us to start making video content, you can help us get there by supporting us on Patreon. It's linked in the show notes. You can support us at Get Commanded on the Patreon website. And we would like to make a special shout out to some of our patrons. Firstly, Stella Tam, thank you very much. And a very special shout out to Fletcher Cutting for supporting us in the Space Commander tier. Fletcher, you are the best.
It's true. We'd also like to thank Palms Off Gaming, who sponsor this podcast. They make some really fantastic deck boxes, sleeves, binders, and other gaming accessories. Around the time this episode comes out, maybe a little bit later, we're actually featuring on the Palms Off Gaming podcast.
It's so exciting. We're going to be somewhere else.
We're going to be somewhere else. We're going to be in their studio. We've talked about it a few times way back on the podcast if you've heard us talk about it from back then. But they're having us on there, so we're going to chat to them about everything Commander. They don't play Magic, I don't think, any of them.
They've dabbled in it, but we want to talk about products that Commander players want. We're going to talk about the Commander format. We'll link it on all of our socials, but there might be something in this incredible adventure for you guys as well.
Yeah.
We don't want to give away too much yet, but we're talking to Palms Off Gaming and we'd like to give back to you, the listeners, just a little bit.
For sure. But in the meantime, you can go check out their amazing range of products at palmsoffgaming.com.au.
All right, well, it is tradition at the end of an episode. We planeswalk away from Magic the Gathering and talk about something else.
We do.
What's cracking? It's your turn.
It is my turn. I'd like to planeswalk us up to Sydney.
You just recently got back from Sydney.
I did get back from Sydney. So I had a few people ask me about this when I was at playing Commander at our local game store last week, because I've talked about it in the podcast before, so I forget people are aware of it. But
we have a public platform.
Yeah, I have planeswalked here before. It's this amazing project I was doing up on, initially Wurundjeri Country and more recently up on Gadigal Country, to work with some members of the Stolen Generation, specifically the survivors of the Kinchilla Boys' Home.
Yeah, if you're not from Australia and you're unaware of what the Stolen Generation is, give it a quick Google. It's pretty confronting.
Yeah.
It's, borderline genocide. It's very horrific. But it is very, very still relevant in today's society and wasn't long ago.
No.
For reference.
So, some would argue it never ended, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But basically, I did the final week of my 4 weeks of developing a play script with a group of the survivors from the Kinchilla Boys' Home who have now an Aboriginal corporation. And their descendants. So we developed a script in consultation with them. But ultimately it was development, right? So we were working stuff out. We were talking to them a lot about what they wanted to see. And it culminated last week up in Sydney on Gadigal Country with a showing. We did 2 showings. One was to some members of the theatre community and the sort of wider Carriageworks is the place where we did it, the Carriageworks community. But we also did a showing to the uncles from the Kinchilla Boys' Home who survived there. And the good news is they absolutely loved it. They literally had not a single negative note for what we put together and the way that we presented it and who presented it and that kind of thing.
Which I don't think you're going to give enough credit to you and the company that you worked with on this. But for Indigenous people to look at a predominantly white, cisgendered, privileged background set of people tell stories of a very historically disadvantaged and disenfranchised and displaced people. For them to say you did a good job I'm choking up. I'm not sure if you can hear that, but it's beautiful. What you've done is incredible. I owe so much to Blaine, my friend Blaine Welsh, who directed the process and put a lot of it together and has a very close familial tie to
to the community up there, but also to the actual survivors themselves. If nothing else, look up the Kinchela Boys Home Aboriginal Corporation and listen to some of the stories from the men who survived there, because they are like legitimately some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my entire life, and they are incredibly generous and so warmly welcomed us and basically gave us their blessing and said we appreciate what you're doing, we want it to continue. So fingers crossed. Next year, we may see some more about this play, and I might still be involved in it. So I just wanted to update everybody because people have been asking me about it. But yes, the outcome is very, very positive, and likely there will be a full production next year. I can't confirm anything, but likely.
No, but it was a great success. I picked you up from the airport, and I got to hear all about this the second you touched down in Melbourne. And I am so glad that it's going to give a little bit of a break, because it took a lot out of you, I think. This was a big project for you, especially as an actor, to embody a voice and speak on this kind of stuff. You got in the car and we spoke for a bit, but there was a good chunk of silence in the car when we drove home, just to let you decompress. Well done. I can't wait for this project to come to Melbourne so I can see it.
Well, hopefully,
And if it doesn't come to Melbourne, I'm up in Sydney. I'm going anywhere to get... Because this was a showing, not full-scale production.
No.
I'm excited. I would support it financially if there's an opportunity to make it happen.
Cool. Well, we'll see what happens, but we'll definitely keep you posted, and in case any of you want to see what that looks like. But I think that's all we have time for. So we'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders.
Goodbye, Commander players.
Bye.